Welcome to the online course on the Nibbāna Sermons 23 to 33 by Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda, an online course hosted by the Numata Center for Buddhist Studies at the University of Hamburg in collaboration with the Barre Center for Buddhist Studies in Massachusetts. And today we will look at Sermon 33. But before that, a few extracts from the online discussion. And Dylan on the seclusion, dispassion, cessation, letting go sequence. It struck me that so often it seems the aspect of being based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing in release, is underappreciated, perhaps even not well understood, and thus underdeveloped. In pointing to Nibbāna as the goal of endeavor, along with development of the Noble Eightfold Path based upon seclusion, dispassion, and cessation, maturing in release, Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda has in a way highlighted a clear roadmap to the finish line. George O'Leary the same. Probably all of us were particularly struck with the cessation letting go climax. Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda here noted Anapanasati as a route to arousing the factors of enlightenment, and later observes the higher grade of right view, which aims at Nibbāna, implies the wisdom of the Four Noble Truths, that noble wisdom which sees the rise and fall. These two comments coalesced remembrance in me of the fourth tetrad of the Anapanasati Sutta, which opens with the rise and fall, and then, as here, progresses through detachment and cessation to letting go. Then a comment by Yin Cheng on the middle path. I really appreciate that when Ñāṇananda pointed out the middle path is not the middle point of the two extremes, even though it is not uncommon to hear people say that the middle path means moderation. And Robert on the same topic. In my own experience, there is a place for understanding the middle path as being a middle way between self-mortification and taking things easy for the beginner. I just think that a continuous gentle effort, balancing effort and energy according to your level of training is essential. And then Kim Allen on the Vosagaramanankaritva Labati Samadhi, the making, which I had translated as making letting go the object, having made that the object one gains samadhi. In my own practice, progressively letting go of tension, physical and mental, to very subtle levels can go a surprisingly long way into states of concentration. And then there was also a discussion, Kim quoting Bhikkhu Bodhi on that aramana in the early suttas doesn't mean so much an object of meditation. And then Katrina has this lovely suggestion about how to translate it. She says perhaps the idea could be conveyed by having made release the objective. I thought that's a very nice way of translating. I think I should adopt that in future. So, time to get into Sermon 33. Etang santang etang panitang yadidang sabba sankara samato sabbu paripati nisango tanhangayo virago nirodo nibbānam. This is peaceful, this is excellent, namely the stilling of all preparations, the relinquishment of all assets, the destruction of craving, detachment, cessation, extinction. With the permission of the assembly of the Venerable Meditative Monks, this is the 33rd sermon in the series of sermons on Nibbāna. Towards the end of our last sermon the other day, we happened to mention that in developing the Noble Eightfold Path, fully intent on Nibbāna, all the other enlightenment factors, namely the four foundations of mindfulness, the four right endeavors, the 4 bases for success, the 5 spiritual faculties, the 5 powers, and the 7 factors of enlightenment go to fulfillment by development. Though we started analyzing the way in which the Buddha clarified the above-mentioned peculiarity of the Noble Eightfold Path in the Mahasalayatanika Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, we could not finish it. From the sutta passage we quoted the other day, we could see how the lack of knowledge of things as they are, in regard to the sixfold sense sphere, give rise to attachment, entanglements, and delusions. As a result of it, the 5 aggregates of grasping get accumulated, leading to an increase in craving that makes for rebecoming, as well as an increase in bodily stress and torment, mental stresses and torment, bodily fevers and bodily and mental suffering. Today, to begin with, let us discuss the rest of that discourse. Chakunchako bhikkhave janang pasang yatha bhutang, rupe janang pasang yatha bhutang, chakko viññāṇaṃ janang pasang yatha bhutang, chakku sampassang janang pasang yatha bhutang, yam vidang chakku sampassa paccaya upapajjati vedaitang sukhaṃ va dukkhaṃ va adukkhamasukhaṃ va tampi janang pasang yatha bhutang, chakkusminna saranjati. Rupesu na saranjati, chakku viññāne na saranjati, chakku sampasse na saranjati, yam vidang chakku sampassa paccaya uppajjati vedāyatang sukhaṃ va dukkhaṃ va adukkhamasukhaṃ va tasmimpi na saranjati. Tassa asara tassa sanyutassa samulassa ādīnavāno passino viharato ayatin panchupādāna khandha appaccayam gacchanti. Tanna chassa puno bhavika nandi raga sagata tatra tatra vinandini sa chassa pahiyati. Tassakaikapi darata pahiyanti, chitasikapi darata pahiyanti, kaikapi santapa pahiyanti, chitasikapi santapa pahiyanti, kaikapi parilaha pahiyanti, chitasikapi parilaha pahiyanti, sukaya sukampi, chitu sukampi patisang videti. Monks knowing and seeing the eye as it actually is, knowing and seeing forms as they actually are, knowing and seeing eye consciousness as it actually is, knowing and seeing eye contact as it actually is, whatever is felt, pleasant or unpleasant, or neither unpleasant nor pleasant, arising in dependence on eye contact, knowing and seeing that too as it actually is. One does not get lustfully attached to the eye, to forms, to eye consciousness, to eye contact, and to whatever is felt as pleasant or unpleasant, or neither unpleasant nor pleasant, arising in dependence on eye contact. And for him who is not lustfully attached, not fettered, not infatuated, contemplating danger, the 5 aggregates of grasping get diminished for the future, and his craving, which makes for rebecoming, which is accompanied by delight and lust, delighting now here, now there, is abundant. His bodily stresses are abundant, his mental stresses are abundant. His bodily torments are abundant, his mental torments are abundant. His bodily fevers are abundant, his mental fevers are abundant. And he experiences bodily and mental happiness. Comment, translation by Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda. When one knows and sees the eye as it actually is, when one knows and sees forms as they actually are, when one knows and sees eye consciousness as it actually is, when one knows and sees eye contact as it actually is, when one knows and sees as it actually is the feeling felt as pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, that arises with eye contact as condition, then one is not inflamed by lust for the eye, for forms, for eye consciousness, for eye contact, for the feeling felt as pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, that arises with eye contact as condition. When one abides uninflamed by lust, unfettered, uninfatuated, contemplating danger, then the 5 aggregates affected by clinging are diminished for oneself in the future, and one's craving, which brings renewal of being, is accompanied by delight and lust, and delights in this or that, is abundant. One's bodily and mental troubles are abundant, one's bodily and mental torments are abundant, one's bodily and mental fevers are abundant, and one experiences bodily and mental pleasure. And here I just paste it in the corresponding part from the Samyukta Agama. End of comment. Then the Buddha goes on to point out how the Noble Eightfold Path gets developed in this noble disciple by this training in regard to the six spheres of sense. Ya yatha bhutasa ditti sasahoti sammaditthi. Yo tatha bhutasa sankappa swasahoti samma sankappo. Yo tatha bhutasa vayama swasahoti samma vayamo. Ya tatha bhutasa sati sasahoti samma sati. Yo tatha bhutasa samadhi swasahoti samma samadhi. Pubeva khopanasakaya kammang vachi kammang ajivo supparisuddho hoti. Eva masayang aryatangi margo bhavana paripuring gacchati. The view of a person such as this is right view. The intention of a person such as this is right intention. The effort of a person such as this is right effort. The mindfulness of a person such as this is right mindfulness. The concentration of a person such as this is right concentration. But his bodily action, his verbal action, and his livelihood have already been purified earlier. Thus this Noble Eightfold Path comes to fulfillment in him by development. Comment, Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda's translation. The view of a person such as this is right view. His intention is right intention, his effort is right effort, his mindfulness is right mindfulness, his concentration is right concentration. But his bodily action, his verbal action, and his livelihood have already been purified earlier. Thus this Noble Eightfold Path comes to fulfillment in him by development. And here I have the Samyukta Agama, which says basically the same thing, also pointing out that these three path factors, speech, action, and livelihood, are been earlier. It says early in the previously said right speech, right action, right livelihood go to fulfillment, become purified by cultivation. So it makes basically the same point. End of comment. It is noteworthy that in this context the usual order inciting the factors of the path is not found. But at the end we are told that bodily action, verbal action, and livelihood have already been purified. This is reminiscent of the explanation given in the Mahācattarisaka Sutta in the previous sermon. That is to say, when the Noble Eightfold Path is perfected at the supramundane level, the three factors, right speech, right action, and right livelihood, are represented by the very thought of abstaining. Comment. It is of course understandable that when Ñāṇananda tries to bring together the Mahāsalayatanika and Mahācattarisaka Sutta, but now in view of commentary study, comparative study showing that the Mahācattarisaka Sutta passage in question is probably a later addition, I think it becomes possible to discern that they are speaking of slightly different things. My understanding is that the Mahāsalayatanika Sutta says that speech, action, and livelihood have been pretty much taken care of earlier. So it is not given that they have been taken care of earlier, there's no need to bring them into the moment of realization. In fact, I don't quite see how someone at the moment of experience Nibbāna could be engaging in having abstention from right speech, right action, right livelihood, even as a thought. Even say right now here as I'm speaking to you, there's no time for me to have any intention to abstain from wrong action or say killing or stealing. The topic just doesn't come up. I have purified my action, my livelihood before the lecture, and for the time of the lecture, that has to be it, because I have to concentrate on the text and what I want to say. And the same would apply to deep insight meditation and all the more to the experience of Nibbāna. So I personally take the presentation of the Mahācattarisaka Sutta as less appropriate and somehow trying to force the whole of the Eightfold Noble Path into this path moment, by that time conceived as a single moment. And it seems to me much more evident, self-evident, and practically applicable what we find in the Mahasalayatanika Sutta, that it simply says you have to take care of these three path factors before, because at the moment of deep insight, you don't really cultivate speech, action, and livelihood. They have to be taken care of before. Anyway, end of comment. Now the Buddha proclaims how all the enlightenment factors reach fulfillment by development when one develops the Noble Eightfold Path in this way. Tasseva imang aryang attangikang magang bhaveto chattarapi satipatthana bhavana paripuring gachanti chattarapi samapadana bhavana paripuring gachanti chattarapi indipada bhavana paripuring gachanti panchapi indriyani bhavana paripuring gachanti panchapi balani bhavana paripuring gachanti santapi bojjanga bhavana paripuring gachanti tasimedve dhamma yuganadda vattanti samato chapi passanacha. When he develops this Noble Eightfold Path in this way, the four foundations of mindfulness also come to fulfillment by development. The four right endeavors also come to fulfillment by development. The four bases for success also come to fulfillment by development. The five faculties also come to fulfillment by development. The five powers also come to fulfillment by development. And the seven factors of enlightenment also come to fulfillment by development. These two things, namely serenity and insight, occur in him yoked evenly together. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda. When he develops this Noble Eightfold Path, the four foundations of mindfulness also come to fulfillment in him by development. The four right kinds of striving also come to fulfillment in him by development. The four bases for spiritual power also come to fulfillment in him by development. The five faculties also come to fulfillment in him by development. The five powers also come to fulfillment in him by development. The seven enlightenment factors also come to fulfillment in him by development. These two things, serenity and insight, occur in him yoked evenly together. And here's the Samyukta Agama, which also brings in the same qualities, and it has at a little later point then it also brings in tranquility and insight. End of comment. The net result of perfecting all the enlightenment factors is summed up by the Buddha in the following declaration. So ye dhamma abhinya parinyayati dhamme abhinya parijanati. Ye dhamma abhinya pahatabbati dhamme abhinya pajahati. Ye dhamme abhinya bhavitabbati dhamme abhinya bhaviti. Ye dhamme abhinya satchikatabbati dhamme abhinya satchikaroti. He comprehends by direct knowledge those things that should be comprehended by direct knowledge. He abandons by direct knowledge those things that should be abandoned by direct knowledge. He develops by direct knowledge those things that should be developed by direct knowledge. He realizes by direct knowledge those things that should be realized by direct knowledge. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda. He fully understands by direct knowledge those things that should be fully understood by direct knowledge. He abandons by direct knowledge those things that should be abandoned by direct knowledge. He develops by direct knowledge those things that should be developed by direct knowledge. He realizes by direct knowledge those things that should be realized by direct knowledge. And here I have again pasted in the Samyukta Agama. And I just wanted to note that these four activities described in this context are the same that we find in what according to tradition was the first discourse by the Buddha, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, where he also states that in relation to each of the for truth he performed these particular activities, fully understanding, abandoning, developing, and realizing. And it was only when he had completed that he could claim to be fully awakened. End of comment. The things that should be comprehended by direct knowledge are explained in the sutta itself as the five aggregates of grasping. The things that should be abandoned by direct knowledge are ignorance and craving. The things that should be developed by direct knowledge are serenity and insight. The things that should be realized by direct knowledge are true knowledge and deliverance. So then, as we have already mentioned, the orderly arrangement in these 37 enlightenment factors is well illustrated in the discourse. It is because of this orderliness that even in a stream winner who is well established in the Noble Eightfold Path, other enlightenment factors are said to be present as if automatically. simply because the phrase Ekaya noyang bhikkave maggo occurs in the Satipatthana Sutta. Some are tempted to interpret the four foundations of mindfulness as the only way. We have pointed out, with valid reasons on an earlier occasion, that such a conclusion is unwarranted. Ekayano does not mean the only way, it means directed to one particular destination, that is to Nibbāna. That is why the words Ñāya Sadigamaya Nibbāna Sasachikiriyaya, for the attainment of the supramundane path, for the realization of Nibbāna, occur later on in the same sentence. The four foundations of mindfulness are the preliminary training for the attainment of the supramundane path and realization of Nibbāna. The initial start made by the four foundations of mindfulness is carried over by the four right endeavors, the four bases for success, the five faculties, the five powers, and the seven enlightenment factors, to reach the Atma of perfection in the Noble Eightfold Path. In the Mahasalayatanika Sutta, we came across the repetitive phrase Jnanam Passang Yatha Bhutam, knowing and seeing as it actually is, used in connection with the eye, forms, eye consciousness, eye contact, and whatever is felt due to eye contact. Let us examine what this knowing and seeing as it actually is amounts to. Perception has been compared to a mirage. This mirage nature of perception has to be understood. A deer which sees a mirage in a plain from a distance in the dry season has a perception of water in it. In other words, it imagines water in the mirage. Impelled by that imagining, it runs towards the mirage, with the idea that by running it can do away with the gap between itself and the water, and reach that water. But there is something that the deer is not aware of, and that is that this gap can never be reduced by running. So long as there are two ends, there is a middle. This is a maxim worth emphasizing. Where there are two ends, there is a middle. If the eye is distinguished as one end, and what appears in the distance is distinguished as water, there is an intervening space, a gap between the two. All these three factors are integral in this perceptual situation. That is why the gap can never be done away with. The emancipated one, who has understood that this can never be eliminated, does not run after the mirage. That one with discernment, that arahant, stops short at the scene, true to the aphorism ditte dittamatam, in the scene, just the scene. He stops at the heard in the heard. He stops at the sensed in the sensed. He stops at the cognized in the cognized. He does not go on imagining, like that deer, taking his stand on perception. He does not imagine a thing seen or one who sees, nor does he entertain imaginings in regard to the heard, the sensed, and the cognized. The fact that this freedom from imaginings is there in an arahant is clear from the statement we quoted from the Chabbisudana Sutta on an earlier occasion. According to that discourse, a monk rightly claiming arahanthood, one who declares himself to be an arahant, should be able to make the following statement in regard of the seen, the heard, the sensed, and the cognized. Dittiko angavoso anupayo anapayo anisito apatibadho vibbamuto visanyutta vimaryarikatena cetasa viharami. Friends, with regard to the seen, I dwell unattracted, unrepelled, independent, uninvolved, released, unshackled, with the mind free from barriers. Comment, translation by Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda. Friends, regarding the seen, I abide unattracted, unrepelled, independent, detached, free, dissociated, with the mind rid of barriers. End of comment. Now let us try to understand this statement in the light of what we have already said about the mirage. One can neither approach nor retreat from a mirage. Generally, when one sees a mirage in the dry season, one imagines the perception of water in it and runs toward it due to thirst. But let us for a moment think that on seeing the mirage one becomes apprehensive of a flood, and turns and runs away to escape it. Having run some far, if he looks back, he will still see the mirage behind him. So in the case of a mirage, the more one approaches it, the farther it recedes. The more one recedes from it, the nearer it appears. So in regard to the mirage of percepts, such as the seen and the heard, the Arahant neither approaches nor recedes. Mentally he neither approaches nor recedes, though he may appear to do both physically, from the point of view of the worldling. Anupayo anapayo, unattracted, unrepelled. It is the same with regard to the term anisito, independent. He does not resort to the mirage with the thought, here's good reservoir. Apatibaddo, uninvolved. He is not mentally involved in the mirage. Vipammutto, released. He is released from the perception of water in the mirage, from imagining water in it. Visangyutto, unshackled. He is not bound by it. Vimaryadikatena cetasa, with the mind free from barriers. What are these barriers? The two ends and the middle. The demarcation mentioned above by distinguishing I as distinct from form, with the intervening space or the gap as the tertium quid. So for the Arahant, there are no barriers by taking the I, the form, and the gap as discrete. Now, from what we have already discussed, it should be clear that by manjana, or imagining, a thinghood is attributed to the seen, the heard, the sensed, and the cognized. One imagines a thing in the seen, heard, etc. By that very imagining a thing as a thing, it becomes another thing. True to the dictum expressed in the line of that verse from the Dvayatānupassana Sutta we had quoted earlier, Yena yeni manyanti tatutang hoti anyatha. In whatever egoistic terms they imagine, thereby it turns otherwise. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. In whatever way they conceive it, it turns out otherwise. End of comment. That is why we earlier said that the thing has to be there first for it to become another thing, for there to be an otherwiseness. The more one tries to approach the thing imagined, the more it recedes. In our analysis of the Mula Pariyaya Sutta, we discussed at length about the three levels of knowledge mentioned there, namely Sanya, Abhinya, and Parinya. The untaught worldling is bound by sense perception and goes on imagining according to it. Perceiving earth in the earth element, he imagines earth as a thing, he imagines in the earth, earth is mine, from the earth, etc. So also with regard to the seen, dictum. But the disciple in training, Seka, since he has a higher knowledge of conditionality, although he has not exhausted the influxes and latencies, trains in resisting from the tendency to imagine. An emancipated one, the Arahant, has fully comprehended the mirage nature of perception. It seems therefore that these forms of manjana enable one to imagine things, attributing a notion of substantiality to sense data. In fact, what we have here is only a heap of imaginings. There is also an attempt to hold on to things imagined. Craving lends a hand to it, and so there is grasping, upadana. Thereby, the fact that there are three conditions is ignored or forgotten. In our analysis of the Madhupindika Sutta, we came across a highly significant statement. Chakuncha vusapaticca rupacha banjati chakku viññānam. Dependent on the eye and forms, friends, arises eye consciousness. The deepest point in sense perception is already implicit there. This statement clearly indicates that eye consciousness is dependently arisen. Thereby we are confronted with the question of the two ends and the middle discussed above. In fact, what is called eye consciousness is the very discrimination between eye and form. At whatever moment the eye is distinguished as the internal sphere, and form is distinguished as the external sphere, it is then that eye consciousness arises. That itself is the gap in the middle, the intervening space. Here then we have the two ends and the middle. To facilitate understanding this situation, let us hark back to the simile of the carpenter we brought up in an earlier sermon. We mentioned that a carpenter, fixing up a door by joining two planks, might speak of the contact between the two planks when his attention is turned to the intervening space, to see how well one plank touches the other. The concept of touching between the two planks came up because the carpenter's attention picked up the two planks as separate and not as one board. A similar phenomenon is implicit in the statement Chakuncha paticca rupecha upajjati chakku viññānam. Dependent on eye and forms arises eye consciousness. In this perceptual situation, the eye is distinguished from forms. That discrimination itself is consciousness. That is the gap or the interstice, the middle. So here we have the two ends and the middle. Eye contact, from the point of view of Dhamma, is an extremely complex situation. As a matter of fact, it is something that has two ends and a middle. The two ends and the middle belong to it. However, there's a tendency in the world to ignore this middle. The attempt to tie up the two ends by ignoring the middle is upadana or grasping. That is impelled by craving, tanha. Due to craving, grasping occurs as a matter of course. It is as if the deer, thinking, I am here and the water is there, so let me get closer, starts running towards it. The gap is ignored. A similar thing happens in the case of sense perception. What impels one to ignore that gap is craving. It is sometimes called lepa or glue. With that agglutinative quality in craving, the gap is continually sought to be glued up and ignored. The Buddha has compared craving to a seamstress. The verb simbati or sangsimbati is used to convey the idea of sewing and weaving both. In sewing as well as in weaving, there is an attempt to reduce a gap by stitching up or knitting up. What is called upadana, grasping or holding on, is an attempt to tie up two ends with the help of tanha, craving or thirst. In the Tissamettaya Sutta of the Parayana Vagga in the Sutta Nipata, the Buddha shows how one can bypass this seamstress or weaver, that is craving, and attain emancipation in the following extremely deep verse. Yo bandam aviññāya manjimantana lipati tang brumi mahapuvi suti soidari burning achga. He who, having known both ends, with wisdom does not get attached to the middle, he might call a great man. He has gone beyond the seamstress in this world. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Having directly known both ends, by reflection one does not get stuck in the middle. I call him a great man. He has here transcended the seamstress. End of comment. This verse is so deep and meaningful that already during the lifetime of the Buddha, when he was dwelling at Isipatana in Benares, a group of elder monks gathered at the assembly hall and held a symposium on the meaning of this verse. Comment, yeah, I really like how Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda always tries to make things relevant to today, such as now calling this a symposium when the monks meet and discuss. End of comment. In the Buddhist time, unlike today, for deep discussions on Dhamma, they took up such deep topics as found in the Atthaka Vagga and Parayana Vagga of the Sutta Nipata. In this case, the topic that came up for discussion, as recorded among the sixes in the Anguttara Nikaya, is as follows. Katamunuku amo soikuanto, katamudutiyanto, king manje ka sibbani. What friends is the one end? What is the second end? What is in the middle, and who is the seamstress? The first Venerable Thera, who addressed the assembly of monks on this topic, offered the following explanation. Contact friends is one end, the rising of contact is the second end, cessation of contact is in the middle, craving is the seamstress. For it is craving that stitches up for the birth of this and that specific existence. In so far, friends, does a monk understand by higher knowledge what is to be understood by higher knowledge, comprehend by full understanding what is to be comprehended by full understanding, understanding by higher knowledge what is to be understood by higher knowledge, comprehending by full understanding what is to be comprehended by full understanding, he becomes an end of suffering in this very life. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Contact friends is one end, the rising of contact is the second end, the cessation of contact is in the middle, and craving is the seamstress. For craving soothes one to the production of this or that state of existence. It is in this way that a bhikkhu directly knows what should be directly known, fully understands what should be fully understood, and by doing so in this very life he makes an end of suffering. End of comment. Craving, according to this interpretation, is the seamstress, because it is craving that puts the stitch for existence. Then the second Venerable Thera puts forth his opinion. According to his point of view, the past is one end, the future is the second end, the present is the middle, craving is the seamstress. A third Venerable Thera offers his interpretation. For him, one end is pleasant feeling, the second end is unpleasant or painful feeling, and the middle is neither unpleasant nor pleasant feeling. Craving is again the seamstress. A fourth Venerable Thera opines that the one end is name, the second end is form, the middle is consciousness, and the seamstress is craving. A fifth Venerable Thera puts forward the view that the one end is the 6 internal sense spheres, the second end is the 6 external sense spheres, consciousness is the middle, and craving is the seamstress. A sixth Venerable Thera is of the opinion that the one end is Sakkaya, a term for the 5 aggregates of grasping, literally the existing body. The second end, according to him, is the rising of Sakkaya, the middle is the cessation of Sakkaya. As before, the seamstress is craving. When 6 explanations had come up before the symposium, one monk suggested, somewhat like a point of order, that since 6 different interpretations have come up, it would be best to approach the teacher, the fortunate one, and report the discussion for clarification and correct judgment. Approving that suggestion, they all went to the Buddha and asked, Kasanuko Bhante Subhasitan, Venerable Sir, whose words are well spoken? The Buddha replied, Monks, what you all have said is well said from some point of view or other. But that for which I preached that verse in the Metteya Panya is this, and quoting the verse in question, the Buddha explains, Monks, contact is one end, the arising of contact is the second end, the cessation of contact is in the middle. Craving is the seamstress, for it is craving that puts the stitch for the birth of this or that existence. In so far, monks, does a monk understand by higher knowledge what is to be understood by higher knowledge, and comprehend by full understanding what is to be comprehended by full understanding. Understanding by higher knowledge what is to be understood by higher knowledge, and comprehending by full understanding what is to be comprehended by full understanding, he becomes an end of suffering in this very life. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. In a way, because you have all spoken well, but listen and attend closely, as I tell you what I intended when I said in the Parayana, in the question of Metteya. Contact bhikkhus is one end, the rising of contact is the second end, the cessation of contact is in the middle, and craving is the seamstress. For craving soothes one to the production of this or that state of existence. It is in this way that a bhikkhu directly knows what should be directly known, fully understands what should be fully understood. And by doing so, in this very life, he makes an end of suffering. End of comment. The Buddha's explanation happens to coincide with the interpretation given by the first speaker at the symposium. However, since he ratifies all the 6 interpretations as well said, we can see how profound and at the same time broad the meaning of this cryptic verse is. Let us now try to understand these 6 explanations. One can make use of these 6 as meditation topics. The verse has a pragmatic value, and so also the explanations given. What is the business of this seamstress or weaver? According to the first interpretation, craving stitches up the first end contact with the second end, the arising of contact, ignoring the middle, the cessation of contact. It is beneath this middle, the cessation of contact, that ignorance lurks. As the line Manjimantana Lipati, with wisdom does not get attached to the middle, implies, when what is in the middle is understood, there is emancipation. One is released from craving. So our special attention should be directed to what lies in the middle, the cessation of contact. Therefore, according to the first interpretation, the seamstress craving stitches up contact and the rising of contact, ignoring the cessation of contact. According to the second interpretation, the past and the future are stitched up, ignoring the present. The third interpretation takes it as a stitching up of unpleasant feeling and pleasant feeling, ignoring the neither unpleasant nor pleasant feeling. The fourth interpretation speaks of stitching up name and form, ignoring consciousness. For the fifth interpretation, it is a case of stitching up the 6 internal sense spheres with the 6 external sense spheres, ignoring consciousness. In the sixth interpretation, we are told of a stitching up of Sakkaya or existing body, with the rising of the existing body, ignoring the cessation of the existing body. We mentioned above that in sewing as well as in weaving, there is an attempt to reduce a gap by stitching up or knitting up. These interpretations show us that ignoring the middle is a common trait in the worldling. It is there that ignorance lurks. If one rightly understands this middle, dispassion sets in, leading to disenchantment, relinquishment, and deliverance. Let us now turn our attention to a few parallel discourses that throw some light on the depth of these meditation topics. We come across 2 verses in the Dvayatanupasana Sutta of the Sutta Nipātan, which are relevant to the first interpretation, namely that which concerns contact, the arising of contact, and the cessation of contact. Sukhang va yadiva dukkhaṃ adukkhaṃ saha ajhattam cha bahinda cha yang kinchayati viditam etam dukkhanti nyatmana mosa dhammam palokinam pussa vayam pasam evam tatta virajati pidananam khaya bhikkhū niccāto parinimbuddho. Be it pleasant or unpleasant, or neither unpleasant nor pleasant, inwardly or outwardly, all what is felt, knowing it as pain, delusive and brittle, touch after touch, seeing how it wanes, that way he grows dispassionate therein. By the extinction of feeling it is that a monk becomes hungerless and fully appeased. Comment? Translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Whether it is pleasant or painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, whatever there is that is felt, internally and externally, having known this is suffering, of a false nature, disintegrating, having touched and touched them, seeing them vanishing, one understands them thus. Through the destruction of feelings, a bhikkhu, hungerless, is fully quenched. End of comment. The 2 lines pussa vayam pasam and evam tatta virajati, touch after touch, seeing how it wanes, that way he grows dispassionate therein, are particularly significant, as they are relevant to the knowledge of breaking up in the development of insight. It seems, therefore, that generally the cessation of contact is ignored or slurred over by the worldling's mind, busy with the rising aspect. Therefore, the seeing of cessation comes only with the insight knowledge of seeing the breaking up, Bhanga Ñāṇa. As an illustration in support of the second interpretation, we may quote the following verse from the Bhaddikaratta Sutta of the Majjhima Nikāya. Atitang nan vāgameya na badikangya nāgatam yattatītang pahinantang appattancha anāgatam pachupanancha yudhammam tatta vipassati asanghirang asankupam tang vidvam manabruhaye. Let one not trace back whatever is past, nor keep on hankering for the not yet come. Whatever is past is gone for good. That which is future is yet to come. But whoever sees that which rises up, as now with insight, as and when it comes, neither drawing in nor pushing out, that kind of stage should the wise cultivate. Comment, translation by Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda. Let not the person revive the past, or on the future build his hopes, for the past has been left behind, and the future has not been reached. Instead, with insight, let him see each presently arisen state. Let him know that and be sure of it, invisibly, unshakably. And the Majjhima parallel. Be careful not to think about the past, and do not long for the future. Matters of the past have already ceased, the future has not yet come. As for phenomena in the present moment, one should contemplate with mindfulness their lack of stability. The wise awaken in this way. End of comment. In the reflection on preparations, sankhara in deep insight meditation, it is the present preparations that are presented to reflection. That is why we find the apparently unusual order atita, anagata, paccuppanna, past, future, present, mentioned everywhere in the discourses. To reflect on past preparations is relatively easy, so also are the future preparations. It is the present preparations that are elusive and difficult to master. But in deep insight meditation, the attention should be on the present preparations. So much is enough for the second interpretation. The third interpretation has to do with the three grades of feeling, the pleasant, unpleasant, and the neither unpleasant nor pleasant. About these we have already discussed at length on an earlier occasion, in connection with the long dialogue between the Venerable Arahant Dhammadinna and the Lady Sattvavisakha on the question of those three grades of feeling. Suffice it for the present to cite the following relevant sections of that dialogue. Sukhaya Vedanaya Dukkha Vedana Patibhago, Dukkaya Vedanaya Sukha Vedana Patibhago, Adukkama Sukhaya Vedanaya Avidya Patibhago, Avidyaya Vidya Patibhago, Vidyaya Vimurti Patibhago, Vimurtiya Nibbāna Patibhago. Unpleasant feeling is the counterpart of pleasant feeling. Pleasant feeling is the counterpart of unpleasant feeling. Ignorance is the counterpart of neither unpleasant nor pleasant feeling. Knowledge is the counterpart of ignorance. Deliverance is the counterpart of knowledge. Nibbāna is the counterpart of deliverance. Comment, translation by Bhikkhu Ñāṇananda. Painful feeling is the counterpart of pleasant feeling. Pleasant feeling is the counterpart of painful feeling. Ignorance is the counterpart of neither painful nor pleasant feeling. True knowledge is the counterpart of ignorance. Deliverance is the counterpart of true knowledge. Nibbāna is the counterpart of deliverance. And the Madhyama Agama parallel. The counterpart to pleasant feeling is painful feeling. The counterpart to painful feeling is pleasant feeling. The counterpart to pleasant and painful feeling is neutral feeling. The counterpart to neutral feeling is ignorance. The counterpart to ignorance is knowledge. The counterpart to knowledge is nirvana. Yeah, there's two minor differences. One is that we get the counterpart to pleasant and painful feeling, and in this way the whole sequence becomes more coherent, because it's every time something said earlier is taken up for the next step, and it doesn't have deliverance, so it goes directly from knowledge to nirvana. End of comment. The counterpart, or the other half of pleasant feeling, is unpleasant feeling. The counterpart of unpleasant feeling is pleasant feeling. Between these two, there's a circularity in relationship, a seesawing. There's no way out. But there's in the middle neither unpleasant nor pleasant feeling. The counterpart of neither unpleasant nor pleasant feeling is ignorance. So we see how the neutrality and indifference of equanimity has beneath it ignorance. But luckily there is the good side in this pair of counterparts. The deliverance lies that way, for knowledge is the counterpart of ignorance. When ignorance is displaced, knowledge surfaces. From knowledge comes deliverance, and from deliverance Nibbāna or extinction. This much is enough for the third interpretation. Now for the fourth interpretation. Here we have consciousness between name and form. Let us remind ourselves of the two verses quoted in an earlier sermon from the Dvayatānupassana Sutta of the Sutta Nipāta. Yecha rūpupagāsattā yecha rūpathāyino nirodhaṃ appajanantā āgantara punambhavam. Yecha rūpi pariññāya arūpesu asantita nirode ye vimucchanti je jana machuhayino. Those beings that go to realms of form, and those who are settled in the formless realms, not understanding the fact of cessation, come back again and again to existence. Those who, having comprehended realms of form, do not settle in formless realms, are released in the experience of cessation. It is they that are the dispellers of death. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Those beings who fare on to form, and those who dwell in the formless, not understanding cessation, come back to renewed existence. But those who have fully understood forms, without settling down in formless states, who are liberated in cessation, those people have abundant death. End of comment. The cessation here referred to is the cessation of consciousness, or the cessation of becoming. Such emancipated ones are called dispellers of death, machuhayino. We have mentioned earlier that before the advent of the Buddha, and even afterwards, sages like Alara Kalama tried to escape from Rupa by grasping the formless, Arupa. But only the Buddha could point out that one cannot win release from form by resorting to the formless. Release from both should be the aim. How could that come about? By the cessation of consciousness, which discriminates between form and formless. It is tantamount to the cessation of existence, bhava nirodha. As a little hint to understand this deep point, we may allude to that simile of the dog on the plank across the stream which we brought up several times. Why does that dog keep on looking at the dog it sees in the water, its own reflection? Because it is unaware of the reflexive quality of the water. Consciousness is like that water, which has the quality of reflecting on its surface. What is there between the seen dog and the looking dog, as the middle, is consciousness itself. One can therefore understand why consciousness is said to be in the middle between name and form. Generally, in the traditional analysis of the relation between name and form in consciousness, this fact is overlooked. True to the simile of the magical illusion given to consciousness, its middle position between name and form is difficult for one to understand. Had the dog understood the reflective quality of water, it would not halt on that plank to gaze down and growl. The fifth interpretation puts the 6 internal sense spheres and the 6 external sense spheres on either side to have consciousness in the middle. A brief explanation would suffice. Dvayang bhikkhave paticca viññānang sambhoti. Monks, dependent on a diet, consciousness arises, says the Buddha. That is to say, dependent on internal and external sense spheres, consciousness arises. As we have already pointed out, consciousness is the very discrimination between the two. Therefore, consciousness is the middle. So at the moment when one understands consciousness, one realizes that the fault line lies in this discrimination itself. The farther limit of the internal is the near limit of the external. One understands then that the gap, the interstice between them, is something imagined. Then, as to the sixth interpretation, we have the Sakkaya, the existing body, and Sakkaya Samudaya, the arising of the existing body, as the two ends. Because the term Sakkaya is not often met with, it might be difficult to understand what it means. To be brief, the Buddha has defined the term as referring to the 5 aggregates of grasping. Its derivation, Sakkaya, indicates that the term is suggestive of the tendency to take the whole group as existing, giving way to the perception of the compact, Ghana Sanya. The arising of this notion of an existing body is Chandaraga, or desire and lust. It is due to desire or craving that one grasps a heap as a compact whole. The cessation of the existing body is the abandonment of desire and lust. This then is a summary of the salient points in the 6 interpretations as meditation topics for realization. Let us now turn our attention to the sewing and weaving spoken of here. We have mentioned above that both in sewing and weaving a knotting comes in, as a way of reducing the gap. This knotting involves some kind of attracting, binding, and entangling. In the case of a sewing machine, every time the needle goes down, the shuttle hastens to put a knot for the stitch. So long as this attraction continues, the stitching goes on. There is some relation between sewing and weaving. Sewing is an attempt to put together 2 folds. In weaving, a single thread of cotton or wool is looped into 2 folds. In both, there is a formation of knots. As already mentioned, knots are formed by some sort of attraction, binding, and entangling. Now, craving is the seamstress who puts the stitches to this existence, bhava. She has a long line of qualifications for it. Puno bhavika, nandi raga sagata, tatra tatrabi nandini are some of the epithets for craving. She is the perpetrator in rebecoming or renewed existence, puno bhavikam, bringing about birth after birth. She has a trait of delighting and lusting, nandi raga sagata. Notoriously licentious, she delights now here, now there, tatra tatrabi nandini. Like that seamstress, craving puts the stitches into existence. even as the needle and the shuttle. Craving draws him with upadana, grasping, while conceit binds, and views complete the entanglement. That is how existence gets stitched up. At whatever moment the shuttle runs out of its load of cotton, the apparent stitches do not result in a seam. Similarly, in a weaving, if instead of drawing in the thread to complete the knot, it is drawn out, all what is woven will be undone immediately. This is the very difference between existence and its cessation. Existence is a formation of knots and stress, cessation is an unraveling of knots and stress. Existence is a formation of knots and stress, cessation is an unraveling of knots and rest. The following verse in the Sudattaka Sutta of the Sutta Nipata seems to put in a nutshell the philosophy behind the simile of the seamstress. Na kapayanti na porekkaronti, acchanta sudditi na te vadanti, adanagantam gatitang visajja, asana kubbanti kuhinchi loke. They fabricate not, they proffer not, nor do they speak of a highest purity. Unraveling the tangled knot of grasping, they form no desire anywhere in the world. Comment translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. They do not construct, they have no preferences. They do not assert, this is ultimate purity. Having loosened the knot of grasping that had been tied, they do not form desires for anything in the world. End of comment. The comments we have presented here, based on the verse beginning with Yo Bantam Abhinyaya, could even be offered as a synopsis of the entire series of 33 sermons. All what we brought up in these sermons concerns the question of the two ends and the middle. The episode of the two ends and the middle enshrines a profound insight into the law of dependent arising and the Buddha's teaching on the middle path. That is why we said that the verse in question is both profound and broad, as far as its meaning is concerned. So now that we have presented this synoptic verse, we propose to wind up this series of sermons. As a matter of fact, the reason for many a misconception about Nibbāna is a lack of understanding the law of dependent arising and the middle path. For the same reason, true to the Buddha's description of beings as taking delight in existence, bhavarama, lusting for existence, bhavarata, and rejoicing in existence, bhavasamudita, Nibbāna came to be apprehensively misconstrued as tantamount to annihilation. Therefore, even commentators were scared at the prospect of cessation of existence and tried to explain away Nibbāna through definitions that serve to perpetuate craving for existence. If by this attempt of ours to clear the path to Nibbāna, overgrown as it is through neglect for many centuries, due to various social upheavals, any store of merit accrued to us, may it duly go to our most venerable great preceptor, who so magnanimously made the invitation to deliver this series of sermons. As he is staying away from medical treatment at this moment, aged and ailing, let us wish him quick recovery and long life. May all his Dhamma aspirations be fulfilled. May the devoted efforts and meditation of all those fellow dwellers in this holy life, who listen to these sermons and tape them for the benefit of those who would like to lend ear to them, be rewarded with success. Let a myriad arahant lotuses, unsmeared by water and mud, bright petaled and sweet-scented, bloom all over the forest hermitage pond. May the merits accrued by giving these sermons be shared by my departed parents, who brought me up, my teachers, who gave me vision, and my friends, relatives, and lay supporters, who helped keep this frail body alive. May they all attain the bliss of Nibbāna. May all gods and Brahmas and all beings rejoice in the merits accrued by these sermons. May it conduce to the attainment of that peaceful and excellent Nibbāna. May the dispensation of the fully enlightened one endure long in this world. Let this garland of well-preached Dhamma words be a humble offering at the foot of the Dhamma shrine, which received honor and worship even from the Buddha himself. Comment. This is the traditional way of concluding a teaching by sharing merits. So now at this point we have come to the end of these 33 sermons, and I just wanted to briefly reflect on the whole process and also bring in another topic. Yeah, I was thinking the very fact that these sermons are now available to us is due to several circumstances. If the Venerable would have given those teachings some 20 years earlier, there would not have been a tape recorder to record them. He would have given those sermons and they would have been just there for the moment and afterwards no longer accessible, as has been the case for so many teachings given in previous times in the oral setting. And when he started to translate them, just at that time, the Vipassana Research Institute by Goenkaji, they had produced the first digital version of the Pali Canon, and I had received one copy of that. And so when I started to transcribe, it was just in time for me to be easily able to provide all the references. The Venerable Ñāṇananda has a very precise and accurate Pali pronunciation, so it was very easy for me just on hearing to type in the words and then search and find the sutta passages that he was referring to, because he was quoting all of this from memory. And now, one step further, we are here with this online course. And over these 3 years, we have gathered close to 1,200 participants who have inscribed to follow this course. And so now these teachings from being originally given orally in this particular place in Sri Lanka are all over the world. And that is just to see how powerful these things can develop and spread. But at the same time, it is also a point of, I would like to make a point also of seeing that they have to be put into practice right away now. And this leads me to the other topic that I wanted to briefly touch on, which is the current situation on this planet. I'm speaking in particular about ecological destruction and climate change. The deterioration of living conditions imminent on this planet due to particular climate change is such that if there is not a change in the way humans are behaving right now, we are actually heading towards extinction of humanity. We are heading for a condition on this planet where human life can no longer be sustained. Already, as it is now, we have a mass extinction of animals setting in. We are gradually deteriorating living conditions for human beings. But unless there's a change, unless we stop the way we are acting right now, it will be the end. And that will also be the end of all these teachings. If we don't change, then there will be nobody anymore able to listen or read these Nibbāna Sermons, the teachings by the Buddha, or any other of the products of humanity that humanity in all this long history has acquired. And I think that even though maybe some of you may think, why is he bringing up this topic in a context of Dhamma or in a university lecture? I think it's just something that should be looked at. It should be looked at from the viewpoint of just knowing exactly what's taking place and deciding for ourselves what we want to do or not do. And for this reason, the additional reading I'm offering for this lecture is actually an article that on this particular topic and on the relationship of mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness, to this fact of climate change. And this vision of future catastrophe due to climate change is quite similar and resonates with the discourse on the seven suns that we took up at an earlier sermon. This description of several suns arising and then the whole earth being destroyed. And so what maybe is a good concluding point is this reflection the Buddha suggests in this discourse based on seeing that the whole world is going to fall apart. Evaṁ anicca bhikkhave sankhara, evaṁ aduva bhikkhave sankhara, evaṁ anasasika bhikkhave sankhara. Yavanchidang bhikkhave alang eva sabba sankaresu nibbinitum, alang virajitum, alang vimuchitum. Translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi. So impermanent are conditioned phenomena, so unstable, so unreliable. It is enough to become disenchanted with all conditioned phenomena, enough to become dispassionate toward them, enough to be liberated from them. And the Mayamagama. All formations are impermanent, of a nature not to last, quickly changing by nature, unreliable by nature. Thus one should not delight in or attach to formations. One should loathe them as troublesome, one should seek to abandon them, one should seek to be free from them. Yeah, that is, I think, a good concluding point. Thank you for your attention being with me, and make use of these sermons now to the best of your ability.